Hey gang, it's Rob, and in this video, I'm gonna help you pass Security Plus step by step. Hey gang, it's Rob from ITMastery.com, and my job is to help each and every one of you guys and girls get certified. So in this video, I'm gonna take you step by step with what you need to do and what you need to know to pass the Security Plus. So if you're thinking about getting into cybersecurity, a lot of people go for the Security Plus. The Security Plus is an entry to mid-level certification, and it's actually the #1 most popular certification for the Department of Defense. The Security Plus goes over a bunch of different cybersecurity related topics. So if you go through this roadmap, if you follow this step by step, you should be a lot better off when it's time to take the exam. The first thing that you need to be proficient at, the first thing that you need to really be good at is threats and vulnerabilities. The first thing you need to be concerned with when it comes to threats and vulnerabilities is social engineering. So social engineering is a really big word that basically means people being nosy, right? People being nosy, trying to figure out information about you and your organization, trying to figure out things, places, passwords, routes, times, schedules, anything that they can use to use information against you and your organization. So the type of social engineering attacks you may be aware of or may not be aware of can be phishing, which can be people just literally fishing for information, but instead of spelled with an F, it's spelled with a P. So it's literally somebody fishing for information. And like I said, social engineering is usually somebody that comes under the guise that I'm here to help, I'm your buddy, we're friends, everything is okay, just so they can get as much information as possible out of you to use it against you later on. Now, phishing is just one of the ways that somebody can socially engineer you and get information out of you. They can use shoulder surfing, they can use dumpster diving, they can use so many different techniques to get information out of you, or if you're the boss of all bosses, how to get information out of your team members and out of your employees. But long story short, you have to figure out ways to prevent social engineering. You got to make sure that the team, the people that are around you, are proficient at social engineering. So social engineering is going to be one of those topics that you're going to need to know to pass the exam. The next thing you're going to need to know is types of attacks. Is it a malware attack? Is it a physical attack? Is it a ransomware attack? What type of attack? And then we need to know what the attack is, and then what is the main purpose? Is it trying to steal information? Is it trying to steal information and then duplicate it and use it elsewhere? Is it trying to change the information? Is it trying to delete the information? Okay, so you need to basically know all different types of malware, whether it is a worm, a Trojan, a rootkit. You need to know all these different things to be proficient when it comes to the exam. So just remember that every topic on this exam is going to be talking about cybersecurity. So you have to be super proficient in knowing different types of attacks. What the attack is, what it's actually going to do, right? Another thing is not just knowing the definition, but okay, if somebody actually pulls this attack off, what's going to actually happen? And then when attackers or hackers or whoever, when they usually use these types of attacks, what are they usually looking for? What is usually the payoff, right? So that is another thing that you need to know is types of attacks. Once again, you need to know, what is the attack actually doing? Is it specific to applications? Is it specific to networks? Is it specific to websites? Is it specific to people? Okay, so not only knowing about attacks in a broad sense of the word, but knowing about attacks in a super focused way, right? So just remember that whatever you're doing, wherever you're at, there's somebody trying to get you, right? So that's kind of how you have to look at it when you are in cybersecurity. The next thing you need to know is about threats and the type of threat actors that are out there. So when you're in cybersecurity, when you're trying to take the actual exam, when you're in the real world as well, you need to know what kind of motivates different people. Is it political? Is it financial? Is it just they just a hater and they hate you? What is the actual motivation of a threat actor? Why are they taking these actions? So you got to figure out those things. So threat actors. And not only do you need to have a good portfolio, a good background of the threat actors and why they're doing what they're doing, but you need to actually figure out what they're actually doing and where they're getting information from, right? So is it open source intelligence? Is it just something that they can Google, or are they just finding out stuff on Facebook, on Reddit, so on and so forth? Or is it like closed off proprietary information? Is it confidential information? You need to figure out where are they actually getting their information. So as you keep on building this stuff out, you'll actually be able to figure out, okay, this is what threat actors do, this is their motivation, and this is where they usually get their information from. So that'll allow you to build a playbook on how to actually deal with these types of people. So this is not only important on the exam, but this is actually really, really important in the real world. So it'll allow you to think like a hacker. So hopefully you can stop them before they even start. But if they do attack you, you know exactly how to stop the threat. On the exam and in the real world, you need to be able to express, explain, break down vulnerabilities and what the effect of those vulnerabilities will be. So for example, what are the vulnerabilities of the cloud? What are the vulnerabilities of a brand new application? You want to be super proactive, because as soon as something is created, as soon as something is out there, there's literally thousands, maybe even millions of hackers trying to figure out what vulnerabilities are present. And once they figure out those vulnerabilities, how can we monetize? How can we capitalize on these vulnerabilities, right? So just understand, you're trying to get certified, right? And when you get certified, eventually you're going to be working in cybersecurity. You're going to be making money. Everybody's going to be proud of you. But this can be stressful because a lot of things depend on you. And I'm talking about the people that are serious about this, the people that are trying to level up, the people that are trying to be, you know, the top of their profession. Because you got to understand, hackers are always on top of it, because they only have to be right once. You know, they take 1,000,000 shots, they take 1,000,000 attempts, and get something right one time, and it could be $1 million payoff or a couple $1,000s or whatever. And they just had to do, you know, a little bit of work, had to do a little bit of research just to find out what the vulnerabilities are. So you have to be very, very meticulous about, okay, what are the vulnerabilities in my organization? How can we stop them? If I was a hacker, how would I actually hack my own organization? Now, when it comes to those vulnerabilities, we need to put those things into a threat assessment. So that's the next thing you need to really be really good at on the exam and in the real world. So you got to look at those vulnerabilities, kind of put them on a scale from 1 to 10, or greatest to least, or most likely to happen, least likely to happen. And then kind of figure out a game plan to figure out, okay, which one of these threats do we need to figure out? Which one of these vulnerabilities do we need to tackle first? So you need to always do a security assessment, okay? A security assessment to assess where your situation is, where you want to be, and just make sure that you come up with some kind of baseline that you never fall below that threshold. So a security assessment to kind of see those vulnerabilities, see what your weak areas are, and try to mitigate as many of these threats, as many of these vulnerabilities. Now, another great thing that you want to look into and be aware of in cybersecurity and for the exam is something called penetration testing, right? So a lot of times when we look at security, we look at security in layers, right? So penetration testing sees how many layers can we get through in your security posture to get to whatever we're trying to get to. Now, when it comes to penetration testing, there can be a bunch of different types of penetration testing. It may be white box, black box, gray box, and the difference between all of those, with one type of penetration test, we may give you all the information to see what you can do. Another type of penetration test, we may not give you any information to see what you can actually penetrate. Another type of penetration test, we may give you half and half, right? So it all depends on you. But long story short, a penetration test, a penetration tester takes all those vulnerabilities, looks at all the different threats, and then comes to you if you are the director of security, if you are the person in charge, and say, hey, these are the vulnerabilities that I found. This is how I penetrated. This is how I hacked the network. This is how I took the user's passwords. This is how I took over the server, so on and so forth. And then gives you a plan of action on, hey man, if I was you, this is what I would do to prevent somebody like me from penetrating your network and taking over things and messing stuff up. So gang, that was just the first part. That was just the first part of threats and vulnerabilities. If you feel uncomfortable with any of those things, you need to make sure that you get super proficient on those topics. All right, so we got a bunch of different videos on this channel that go over Security Plus practice tests, and you can just find those in the description, or you can just go back to the Master IT YouTube channel that you should be subscribed to. Like this video and share it, and actually go through those practice tests to kind of see, not just me talking about it, but actually see how it would be formulated in a question and a scenario-based question, to see how proficient, how good you are at these types of questions. And those are the type of questions that's going to be presented on the Security Plus. Go to the Security Plus playlist, play all of those videos, and then go ahead and drop in the comments on one of the videos how you did. The second topic, or the second skill set that you need to be proficient with, is architecture and design. So you need to be very, 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 very careful, very, very meticulous when it comes to the design and the architecture of your organization, of your applications, of your website, of your network, just to reduce some of those vulnerabilities that we talked about in the first domain. So a lot of times we're going to be talking about stuff in an enterprise environment or a big corporation, right? So a big organization, not just mom and pop, not just me and you, not your personal network, but a big network, a big organization, right? So an enterprise level. We got a bunch of employees, we got a bunch of different devices, we got a bunch of moving parts. So you have to understand the architecture and design and come up with security concepts for that organization, for that design. All right, so we got to come up with ways to secure devices, ways to secure data, what data is sovereign, what data needs to be saved, what data needs to be stored, what data needs to be deleted. So a lot of these different things come up in the architecture and design, and the way that you're going to figure out what you need to do on the exam and in real life is coming up with security concepts that's going to actually secure the architecture and the overall design of your organization. We're living in a world now where a lot of stuff is stored in the cloud. So the next thing that you need to be aware of, that you need to be abreast of, is how security may change from physical devices and physical data to actual data stored in the cloud, right? So data that's stored in the cloud is just as important and cause just as much damage as stuff that is stored on your local device. So you have to come up with security measures and security concepts to secure your data that is in the cloud. Also, there's something called virtualization, right? So you can actually use virtual machines, whether it's virtual PCs, virtual servers, instead of physical servers, to store your information or to just use for day-to-day purposes. Now, even though these virtual machines, we can't touch them, they are just as important as physical devices, because your information may be stored on these virtual machines, or a hacker may actually be able to take over these virtual machines, which is stored on a physical machine somewhere, whether it's a PC, whether it's a server. There may be a physical server and then 1,000 virtual servers on that server. And if they get access to the virtual servers, they may get access to the physical server, which means that they have access to the whole shebang-a-bang, which is no bueno. The next thing we need to think about is application development. Or let's say that we're coming up with a new app. We need to figure out how to make the information secure, make the app secure, and actually be able to provision it, deprovision it, basically meaning like, okay, let's onboard it, let's give it to the public, let's make sure it's cool, let's make sure we beta test it, let's make sure that everything is good to go before we give this to the public, where if you put in your social security number, you put in your credit card number, and it's not safe, that can be a catastrophe. So when creating applications, you have to always, as I said before, think about it as a hacker. What vulnerabilities may be present on this application? So when you're developing an app, you always have to think and keep security in mind. Now, when we're talking about anything, whether it's an application, whether it's a network, whether it's a website, authentication and authorization. Authentication and authorization. So we always have to keep these two things in mind. We have to make these things fluid, but we have to make sure that they are secure. So authentication simply means that you prove that you are who you say you are, whether that's facial recognition, whether that's a username and password, whether that's a RFID tag, whatever you use, right? Biometrics, so on and so forth. So authentication is, hey, let me prove that I am who I say I am. And authorization is just literally, okay, this guy says who he says he was. He has access to folders 1, 2, 3. This girl is who she says she was, so she has access to folders X, Y, Z. Now, if at any point in this process, these things get messed up, these things get confused, instead of the CEO having access to stuff, the janitor may have access to everything that the CEO is supposed to have access to. Makes sense? So you got to make sure that you have the authentication and the availability together, right? Mesh together and have them as secure as possible and as fluid as possible with zero mistakes, just to make sure that people that are supposed to have access to stuff have access to it. People that don't have access to stuff don't have access to it. Another super important thing when it comes to cybersecurity, the Security Plus exam, doing stuff in the real world, is resiliency. You have to be resilient. So resiliency pretty much means that when your network users, devices come up with an error or issues, it doesn't break the entire system. It doesn't break the entire experience, right? The resiliency usually comes from redundancy, right? So meaning that you have several different things that are the same thing. So let's say we got a server. This server is for email. That is your email exchange server. Everybody want to send an email, do what they want to do, goes through this server. That server goes down. Damn, can't nobody send an email. Now, if you had a resilient server, you would have redundancy, meaning that we got this server, then we got a backup. Then we got to back up to that backup. So no matter what happens, we can always be up. Another thing is you need to do that with data, because no matter if it's a blackout, a natural disaster, a fire, whatever happens, you need to have your information backed up so you're not completely wiped out. You have your data, files, customer reports, whatever it is, you have that stuff backed up. So if your main site goes down, if your main place of business go down, if your main operations center go down, you can have that information, that data, all that stuff backed up. So you can go to somewhere else and boom, and go and be right back up. But cybersecurity, a lot of times, is in the resiliency. If you don't have a resiliency piece, that redundancy piece, that fail backup plan piece, it will be the end of your organization. Because believe it or not, when it comes to websites, network, access to different things, most people expect stuff to be up 99.999% of the time. For example, let's say you went to Google and Google had an error page. You would freak out, like, what the hell is going on? Most reputable sites, including ITMatchkey.com, if you go to it, it's going to be there, no matter what time it is, no matter where you are in the world. Now, a lot of times when we talk about cybersecurity, people want to get into the super duper complex stuff, but a lot of times you need to also focus on physical controls, the stuff you can physically control. So not only firewalls, virus protection, so on and so forth, we need to make sure we got some locks on the damn doors. We got to make sure we got some cameras, maybe have some Doberman pinchers walking around. You just got to make sure that things are secure physically, whether it's a man trap, a turnstile, a actual security guard that has a roster signing stuff off. Just remember, I know we've been talking for a while and we still ain't nowhere near done, but you have to really think about all of these things, because like I said, on the exam it's going to be important, and real life is going to be important as well, because it's literally cost millions of dollars. So always think about the physical controls, even simple as the lighting in the parking lot. Let's say that somebody break into the organization that you work for, right? And it's dark as hell outside. They broke into the server room, whatever, disabled all the cameras inside of the building, but the cameras on the outside of the building were working. But you couldn't see anything because all the damn lights in the parking lot was off, right? Or they were too dim. So make sure that when we're talking about security, don't forget about the physical security.